I'm Dr. Kristi, and this is Climbing Fish Parenting, practical parenting strategies in 20 minutes or less. I'm a psychologist and behavior analyst, and I work with exhausted, overwhelmed parents who feel like they've tried everything and nothing works. If you're listening to this while folding the laundry, hiding in your car, or wishing bedtime would just end already, you're in the right place. Today, I want to talk about something that confuses a lot of parents, especially parents with more than one wired differently kid. 2 kids, same overwhelm, same stress, sometimes even the same diagnosis. And somehow, one of them is loud about it, and the other one disappears. By the end of this episode, you're going to understand why that happens and why it has nothing to do with which kid is doing better. Ready to transform your parenting journey? Let's dive in. I did a neuropsych assessment for 2 brothers a while back. Same family, close in age, referred for similar concerns. I could hear the younger one coming down the hallway before I ever saw him. Footsteps, a little bit of bouncing off the walls, talking before he was even in the room. He was up and down, reaching for things, touching what he wasn't supposed to touch. During testing, we needed multiple movement breaks just to get through the session. At one point, he was reaching across me to get something on the shelf behind my chair. He filled every available inch of space in that room. His older brother was the opposite. Quiet, loved to read, the kind of kid who could sit for an hour with Legos or Connects, building something elaborate, fully absorbed, barely looking up. In the waiting room, he didn't make a sound. During testing, he was cooperative, soft-spoken. Here's the thing. When I gave their parents the results, they were genuinely stunned, not by the diagnosis itself, but by what it meant that both boys had it. Same diagnosis, completely different presentation. The mom actually said, "How can they have the same thing? They're nothing alike." And both of them were struggling with the exact same things at home. Evening routine, getting through homework, but it looked completely different from the outside. The mom described the younger one as goofing off, trying to drive her mad, like he was doing it on purpose. The older one, she said, just seemed like he didn't care. He always was getting distracted, drifting off task, never really finishing anything, but quietly, without a fight. Same diagnosis, same nightly battles. One loud, one silent. And both boys were genuinely working just as hard. It just didn't look anything alike from where she was standing. What struck me most sitting with that family was realizing that the mom had spent years far more worried about her younger son. He was the one generating phone calls, the one teachers asked about. Her older son had quietly been struggling with the exact same underlying thing for even longer, and almost no one had noticed. Because no one needed to. If you've ever looked at 2 of your own kids, or even 2 kids at the soccer game or the playground, and wondered how the same struggle could look so different, you're in the right place today. Here's the framework I gave that family, and it's one of the most useful lenses I know for understanding why kids who are struggling with the exact same thing can look like they're having 2 completely different experiences. Psychologists talk about behavior falling into 2 broad directions, internalizing and externalizing. Externalizing is what most people picture when they think of a child who's struggling. It's outward, it's loud, visible, yelling, hitting, reaching, climbing, arguing, refusing. It's the behavior that gets noticed, that gets called into the office, that makes a waiting room feel smaller. Internalizing goes the other direction. It's quiet, often invisible. Withdrawal, anxiety, sadness, shutting down, getting lost in a book or a screen or a repetitive activity instead of voicing distress at all. It's the behavior that gets praised for being easy, right up until someone realizes easy wasn't actually what was happening underneath. Here's what I want you to really sit with, because I think it's the part most parents have never heard named clearly. This isn't really about how much energy a child brings to their distress. It's about where that energy goes once it shows up. Both of those brothers were dysregulated at the dinner table every single night. The total amount of struggle wasn't actually different between them. What was different was the direction it traveled. One boy's overwhelm moved outward, into the room, into movement, into noise. The other boy's overwhelm moved inward, into withdrawal, into disengagement, into a kind of quiet drifting that looked like apathy, but wasn't. I want to give you a way to picture this that might make it stick. Imagine the exact same amount of water poured in two different containers. One container is open at the top. The water splashes out, sprays everywhere, gets all over the floor and the walls and everyone standing nearby. The other container is sealed. The same amount of water goes in, but instead of spraying outward, it just keeps filling, quietly, with no visible sign of how full it's actually getting. Until one day it overflows, or until you finally think to check. Neither container was filled with less water. The contained one just isn't telling you how close to full it actually is. I want to ground this more than just one family story because this pattern is well documented. Research following autistic children has found that the majority of them show clinically significant levels of either internalizing or externalizing behavior. If you've ever felt like your child's struggle didn't match what you read about autism in a pamphlet somewhere, this might be part of why. The pamphlet version often assumes one direction, when the reality is that both directions are common, and which one shows up varies enormously from kid to kid. And there's a specific finding buried in the research that I think is genuinely important, and I want to walk through it carefully because it's easy to misread. Studies have found that kids with lower ratings on daily living skills and socialization, the kinds of measures that ask a parent or a teacher to rate how independently a child manages everyday tasks and social situations, tend to also show higher externalizing problems. At first glance, it sounds like I'm telling you something about the child, that lower skills somehow produce more outward behavior. But here's what I want you to sit with instead, because I think it's a more honest and more useful read. These ratings come from the adults around the child, parents, teachers, the people filling out the forms. And a child who is loudly, visibly struggling is going to get noticed every time. Their daily living and social difficulties are right there on full display, impossible to miss. Of course, an adult rating the child is going to score them as having more functional difficulty. They're watching it happen in real time, multiple times a day. Now think about the quiet kid, the one who isn't causing a scene, the one who's also struggling with daily living skills, also struggling socially, but doing it invisibly, without friction, without anyone in the room having a reason to notice. That child can be every bit as functionally impaired as the loud one. They just aren't generating the kind of visible disruption that gets reflected accurately on a rating scale. So I don't think this research is actually telling us that internalizing kids have it easier, or that they're somehow more capable underneath. I think what it's telling us is something that's almost the opposite, that our usual way of measuring a child's struggle is built to catch the loud version of it and can genuinely miss the quiet version entirely. The kid who internalizes isn't less impaired. They're just less likely to be accurately seen as impaired by anyone, including the adults whose job it is to notice. That distinction matters enormously for how you read your own kids. A quiet struggle is not a smaller struggle. It's frequently just an unmeasured one. This research holds for ADHD too, in a pattern a lot of parents will recognize immediately. We tend to see the hyperactive impulsive presentation of ADHD lean towards externalizing, the loud, visible, hard-to-miss version. And we tend to see the inattentive presentation lean towards internalizing, the quieter, drifting, easy-to-overlook version, the kid who isn't causing a scene but also isn't actually getting anything done. This tracks with something I see constantly in my own evaluations. The inattentive kids are so often the ones who get missed entirely, referred years later than their hyperactive peers, because nothing about how they struggle interrupts anyone else's day. And here's the part I really want you to hear, because I think it's more important than the diagnostic categories themselves. This isn't only about which type of ADHD a child has, or whether they're autistic or anxious. It's about where the energy of overwhelm gets routed, and that can shift depending on circumstances that have nothing to do with diagnosis at all. I've seen this play out in families going through a divorce more times than I can count. Two kids, same household, same disruption, same loss. One child becomes withdrawn, quieter, sadder, more anxious, pulling inward. The other child starts acting out, fighting at school, talking back, pushing every limit they can find. Same event, same grief. Two completely different directions for it to travel. And often, the parents come to me worried almost exclusively about the externalizing child, because that's the one generating phone calls from school, while the internalizing child quietly goes unaddressed for months, sometimes years, simply because nothing about their pain was loud enough to demand attention. Neither direction means a child is handling it better or worse than the other. It just means the distress found a different outlet to move through. You might be wondering at this point what actually determines which direction a particular kid's overwhelm travels in. Researchers have looked at this too, and what they've found starts very early, often before a child is even talking. Temperament researchers have identified something called behavioral inhibition, essentially how fearful and withdrawn a child is in response to anything new or uncertain. Some babies and toddlers are naturally watchful, cautious, slow to warm up to new people or new situations. Others are the opposite: reactive, exuberant, quick to approach, quick to react outwardly to anything that frustrates them. These aren't behaviors a child chooses. They show up shockingly early, and they're considered a real biologically rooted piece of temperament. And here's the part that matters for today's conversation. The early temperament has been linked fairly consistently to which direction problems tend to develop later. Children who start out more behaviorally inhibited, more fearful, more withdrawn around novelty, tend to develop more internalizing difficulties as they get older. Children who start out more reactive and exuberant tend to develop more externalizing difficulties. There's even a measurable brain difference underneath some of this. Researchers have found heightened amygdala activation to novelty, specifically in behaviorally inhibited children, which lines up with why a more inhibited kid's first response to something overwhelming is often to pull back and go quiet rather than push outward. I want to be honest with you, though, because the research here isn't perfectly clean in one direction. A few studies have found that highly inhibited temperament in early childhood was actually linked to more externalizing behavior later on, not less, which tells you this isn't a simple fixed formula where shy babies always become quiet kids and reactive babies always become loud ones. Temperament sets a tendency. It doesn't lock in a destiny. There's one more piece of this research I think is especially relevant for this community: sensory over-responsivity. That's been found to predict both internalizing and externalizing problems. Not one or the other, both, which tells you something important. The same underlying sensitivity, the same nervous system running hotter than most, can express itself in either direction, depending on the kid, the day, or the specific situation. A sensory-sensitive kid melting down loudly in a noisy classroom, and a sensory-sensitive kid going silent and shutting their eyes in that same classroom. They might be dealing with the exact same overload. It's just traveling two different routes out. Once you know about this, a few things change about how you read your own kids. First, the quiet one is not necessarily the easy one. A child who internalizes can look from the outside like the kid who's doing fine. No phone calls home, no meltdowns in public, no one asking you what's going on. But no visible struggle and no struggle are not the same thing. Second, the loud one isn't doing it on purpose. That mom's instinct that her younger son was goofing off to drive her mad is one of the most common and most understandable misreadings I see. Externalizing behavior recruits attention by others by its very nature. It's designed neurologically to be hard to ignore. That doesn't make it intentional or manipulative. It just makes it loud. And loud is exhausting to live with, which is why it's so tempting to read intent into it. A behavior that drains you this much surely must be aimed at you. But most of the time, it isn't. It's just where the overwhelm happened to go. Third, the same child can shift directions depending on the day, the setting, or the season. A child who typically internalizes can externalize when their capacity runs out completely. This week, think about your child. Take a few minutes and think honestly about which direction your child tends to move in when they're overwhelmed. For a child who externalizes, ask yourself, what is the behavior actually trying to communicate underneath the volume? For the child who internalizes, ask a harder question. What might I be missing because it isn't loud enough to interrupt my day? I also want to come back to something I mentioned a couple of weeks ago. The free training series I've been building, Why Your Kid Can't Calm Down, officially opens today. It's a deeper dive into exactly the kind of brain science we've been circling in these last few episodes. What's actually happening underneath these reactions in language that's genuinely useful, not just interesting. It's built differently than my usual trainings. 3 short lessons, 10 to 15 minutes each, plus separate short videos specific to ADHD, autism, anxiety, and the combo of ADHD and autism. So you can go straight to what's relevant about your kid after you get that foundation. And it's on demand, which means there's no live date to catch. Start it tonight, stop after one video, come back whenever you actually have 15 minutes. You can find it at climbingfishparenting.com/calm. If any part of these last few weeks has resonated, that's where I'd point you next. All right, that's it for today. 2 kids can carry the exact same overwhelm and look like they're living in 2 completely different worlds. One fills up a room, one disappears. Neither one is doing better. Neither one is choosing it on purpose. The distress is just moving in different directions, looking for somewhere to go. That strategy I just gave you, it's the whole climbing fish philosophy in action. There's a quote, everybody's a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it's stupid. Your kid isn't broken. Your parenting isn't broken. Sometimes we're just asking our fish to climb trees. That's what we fix here. I'm Dr. Kristi, and I'll see you next week.